Hi, everyone. I think we should be live. I haven't done this in a while. So welcome, everyone. Welcome to the new live stream of the Localization News. My name is Andrej Zito. And today is a special episode because we're doing it on Saturday. I have no idea why we're doing it, but we're testing something new and also the availability of my guests that you can see right here on the screen. Oksana and Beat. Welcome, guys. Welcome.
Hey.
Hello.
And so today we are crazy. We want to be talking about localization engineering, how to start as a localization engineering. So if you're tuning into the live stream, if you're with us in the chat, please let us know because we have absolutely no idea if anybody's watching. And especially if somebody's watching who is interested in the topic and wants to learn something from the OGs of engineering in the industry. So we are here for you. If you have any questions, feel free to send them in the chat. At least give us a sign that you're alive and you're here with us. If not, we'll just do the discussion among ourselves and you will see the recording on MultiLingual's YouTube channel. So maybe a few words about you guys and how you relate to engineering. Beat, maybe you can start.
Yes, maybe tell a little bit about my history because I've been doing localization engineering since 1997-ish as an engineer. I kind of fell into the industry. I was hired as a language QA person I was doing contracting actually for a large company in 1995. They hired me in 1996 and started the localization department. And there was no localization engineering position at the time. We had localization QA testers, linguists, translations editors, and we had PMs, and that was it. And there was no technical position. Everybody just did a little bit of it. But as things evolved, as more types of content were localized, they realized they needed somebody who deals with the technical things because it was too much for the PMs. QA was really dealing with testing. So I suggested that I could take on that technical role. I kind of created it. I'm not saying I created it for the world, but I created it in that specific context of that company. It really didn't exist before. And and my feeling is in other companies, similar developments happened where that just evolved more as a role. And really, I can't think about localization without it at this point because there's so many more technologies out there. There's so much more content out there in different types of content. There's a lot of workflow tools, automation that really didn't exist at that time. So that's how I fell into it, really, and have been doing that ever since. Managing a team now of engineers for a smallish localization company, and still doing work for a very large company, same company. So I've seen all sides, the early production, and then also the automation part and all that, and now managing a team.
All right, thank you. Now we know how the position got created. Credit to Beat Stauber. Okay, Oksana, what about you?
Well, so I what are you laughing already?
I'm laughing
because I haven't even said anything.
Yes, because I'm surprised. I'm waiting for what you're going to share because I actually thought the reason why I suggested this topic because I thought that all of us have something to do with engineering, but I just learned that Oksana is kind of like meh.
No. I think I'm having having an emotionally tough week, and I'm like meh about everything. Right. But I just remembered something. So I was studying translation, but I'm a technically inclined person, so I always wanted to do something that has to do with languages and technologies, but I couldn't. Looking for what did I break up?
Yeah, just broke up. Yeah.
So I was always looking for a job that would do something with language and something technical. And once I was Googling and I found this article about localization engineering, and I was like, oh, this is perfect for me because I was like 20 or 21, and I would keep looking for positions for that job, and there would either be no positions because it's such a sort of weird fuzzy position actually, once in Ukraine, I saw a position for a DTP engineer, and I did this task. It took me like 3 days, and then I sent it, and it looked so perfect because I had to like do this whole like chart in a Word document, and I never heard back from them. I had to do like this voiceover, and it was always like so exciting and interesting, and I just never, so I was upset. And so I kept like looking, how can I get into like the technical side of language and translation? And then when I was 24, I got this this guy from Lionbridge looked at my CV, and he was like, why don't you just start a team? Which was really funny because I was always looking for, can I like get an entry, engineering localization position? But I was looking for it for so long that I already had all this experience in data science, and so it actually made more sense for me to like enter at the top, which was hilarious to me, and a really good life lesson. I remember this one guy was like, I was complaining to him that because of my background in linguistics, I couldn't get a good like technical job, and he was like a good entry level technical job, and he was like, apply for a senior position. Like, why are you applying to the, if it's not working for the entry level jobs? And that's how I got started. So I got started, like I actually hired a team of localization engineers, and I really like got to look at this like technology side of the translation business that way. And then, I saw everything that I wanted to see, and now I'm kind of like over it, I guess. Like I have all the information that I wanted. And now what me and my team is doing, we basically are doing like pure NLP data science language stuff. But yeah, that was a really cool thing that happened to me, I think.
That's a funny coincidence that Beat pretty much created the role and you got into the role from the top.
Yeah, that's how this whole industry works. It's all very fuzzy.
Yeah.
But that's why I think this podcast could be really useful because, for the 20-year-old me, this would be a really useful conversation. Because I was so excited about this position idea. Like, how do you get it? Like, what is it even about?
Yeah. That's exactly.
By the way, I'm not claiming I invented the role like Al Gore invented the internet. Just throwing that out there.
So it's good that you mentioned the word fuzzy, that it's fuzzy. So how would we actually define the role of a localization engineer in 2021? Like, what do they do and why they do it?
See, this is what I like about it because there is really a range. I would claim that if somebody does, as their role in localization, does a lot of file pre-processing and post-processing, anything from handoff from the customer to it going into the translation management system, and coming out of the translation management system and be handed to QA or then final delivery. All that technical work to me is localization engineering. So a DTP person is a part of the localization engineering process. So even if somebody just does DTP and maybe some pre-processing all their lives, to me they're a localization engineer. Right. It's not maybe at the highest, most advanced level, but it's part of it. But there's so many opportunities, for example, in the automation, for example. Automating processes. That's great for maybe, more for the introvert who wants to just work quietly and create some stuff. There's the internationalization consultant that goes to customers and talks to them about, how they have to internationalize their content. That's the more outward person who loves the communication aspect, working with customers, helping solve problems, working with their developers, doing training, those kind of things. And then you want people who do process improvement within the team, right? They work with PMs, they work with QA, they work on internal tools. So, beyond automation also, there could be other process tools. They figure out how to do things better, how to do things faster, how to do things more efficiently, how to avoid certain bugs that we run into a lot. So bug reduction, this is a lot big money saver. So there's a lot of opportunity there. And there's so many different kinds of content out there. Some people might be experts in how to do database localization, working with large data sets. Other people are more about, Adobe content. And so I think there's hundreds of opportunities out there. And that's what I love about it. If you're technically minded, there's something out there for you in localization engineering.
I think it actually depends on the particular company that is hiring you, because it depends on the size, on the work processes that they do, what they do. Is it an LSP or is it like just an independent product that needs localizing and they want to localize it inside? Some of the same localization engineering position, it could be about like developing some tools. Sometimes it could be like, it could include like some PM stuff, like you could actually be communicating with the client.
Right.
Sometimes it's just like very simple QA where you check a bunch of files visually. So yeah, that's why it's so fuzzy, because it really just depends on the particular team. And I think that goes for a lot of engineering positions, actually.
Yes, and I think that's something you want to think about, because the opportunities are very different if you work. Let's say you work for Google. Google has huge products that are, I don't know all the details, but my guess is because they're all worldwide tools, they're deeply internationalized. They're available in different languages, stuff like maps, search, other tools. If you are, one part that we really haven't talked about is software developers who actually have, programming skills. That's also, you can be a localization engineer and just focus on localization tools. I would consider that a localization engineer too, or even MT technologies too. You can be specialized in MT technologies from an engineering side. So those are two areas we haven't really mentioned. Let's say you have an opportunity with Google and specifically to be assigned to internationalization and localization internally. That could be a fantastic career because you have, opportunities for fairly high compensation and benefits, which, I'm sure a lot of people don't mind. That can be very different if you work for a localization vendor where you have constant pressure on rates. The most localization vendors are not going to be able to pay you the same amount, but you may really like the environment. You may really like that. A large group of people all into localization, a lot of different teams. You get to work on many projects. If you work for Google, you likely be assigned to maybe one project, or maybe you build a localization library, internationalization library. So it's more single focused, large effort, likely. And if you work for a vendor, you have a lot more opportunities to work on smaller stuff. You jump around to different things. You're involved in a lot of stuff. So you really have to think about that. Or maybe try both, maybe if you have the opportunities, try both and see which world you like better.
Yeah. When you guys were talking about the fact that some of the engineers could take on the PM roles as well, that's how I remember when I started in Moravia many, many years ago. The lead engineers in Moravia were responsible for doing the handoffs to all the vendors. And the project managers were just there to do the finances and to talk to the client. So this is something that I haven't seen in other companies afterwards.
Yeah, we've done that. We've done that where the LE kind of anything that's files, including handoffs to from customers and into the translation tool, all of it is handled by engineers. That's really a matter of what the company wants to set up. We had that in the early times, and we actually decided it'd be better if the PMs had a little more technical involvement. It also helps if, for coverage, of course, it's always easier when more people know more things. But I think it's also balancing, how much does a PM have to do? If it doesn't keep them busy enough, if they're just doing schedule and budget and the engineers have way too much, then you just shift that line a little bit. Have the PMs maybe take care of the creating translation jobs and dispatching and all that and deliveries to customer and stuff like that. That's really a matter of how you want to set it up. But I like a little bit of overlap between the roles because it also helps people understand the other role better if they do a little bit of that on the edges, have a little overlap.
Yeah, about the overlap. So, a story from the field. Once the client sent us, they went to their website and pressed Control S and downloaded the HTML HTML and sent it to the PM, and we're like, translate this. And the PM like did a quote and agreed. And then it got to the engineering, and we said, well, we can translate the HTML, but how are you going to get it like into your website? Because we can translate the page itself, but the strings, like they have, there's the whole internationalization process for the strings. And that's why I think that overlap is important, because the PM needs to understand the technical side of how the strings are delivered for translation. And if the engineer was accepting that order, they would say, no, that this is not acceptable. You have to go like into your backend, wherever your website is hosted, and get the actual strings, not like the raw HTML page.
Yeah, and that gets us to a topic we've talked in previous podcasts about, the early engagement. I think an experienced localization engineer is able to be engaged early with customers, and really in tandem with the PM. If it's possible from a budget and time point of view to have early engagement with the QA lead and an engineer and the PM in that first engagement meeting, I think it's hugely beneficial, because it's all about asking questions. And a good, experienced LE knows how to ask the right questions early, because you want to hit all these topics. You don't want anything to come as a surprise.
Right.
Later in the project, like, oh, we can't actually handle this file, so we don't know how to actually get those back in the website, and there's no language switching strategy and all that. That's the kind of stuff that you want to ask early, and you don't know that as a brand new LE, you're not going to know how to ask those questions. That's something you develop over time.
Yeah, exactly. That would have been my comment, that probably internationalization is something for more experienced people, especially since you're there to consult and help advise the client on how they should be doing things. So it's probably not suited for junior people. I want to quickly go to the chat, because we have some comments from my favorite Tucker Johnson. First one, I've seen job descriptions for local engineer ranging from entry-level PM type roles all the way to senior developer. So what you said, Beat. And they are all called localization engineers. So it is very important to clarify. His second comment, I like this one. LSP says, this process is fully automated. What they mean is this process is managed by offshore LEs you will never meet.
Could be. Yeah, fully automated is always an interesting term. You definitely want to dig a little deeper. But yeah, that's basically, the first question is touching on what we said earlier, that there's such a spread of roles that an LE can do, and really there's not a single definition. If you have a software developer, and then you say maybe C++ or whatever, AngularJS, all these different expertise they can have, it's very easily defined. It's pretty clear when somebody says that, right? But localization engineer, you need to go into the details of what the role entails to really understand what they're expecting. Because they really could expect a developer who knows about libraries and how to use them and how to code, and just with the additional knowledge of localization and internationalization. Or it could mean somebody who does TTP, which has no overlap at all. So you need to look at the details and see if that matches your skill set, and ask questions if you can.
Yes. Talking about questions, I've seen a couple of people come to the stream. Guys, if you have any questions, if you're curious about the role of localization engineer, don't be afraid to ask questions. We're here to answer, at least for the next 40 minutes. So my question would be, we're talking about all these technical skills, because I assume, and I think it's true, that for a localization engineer, that's one of the most technical roles within localization. So what exactly are the skills, the technical skills that we will be looking for? And just to connect our experience, but exactly, I think one or two people asked me that they are interested in getting into localization engineering, and they asked me what should they study, what should they learn. And then I forwarded these people to you, because you're more in the field than I am right now. So when we talk about the skill set package that you should learn or improve on, what exactly do we want? And I guess that your answer will be related to what the engineering is actually about.
it's kind of tricky because there are not as many resources out there as there are for other jobs because of that, not very clearly defined job description, really. I think if you want to actually prepare for, applying for a role, but you don't have any experience, I think it's difficult. There are some courses out there. I've seen some courses, for example, on lynda.com, I think it's called. For example, InDesign internationalization, which is it's actually a really deep, good course. And I think if you work through that course, it will expose you to some of the issues. There's some good articles out there from many localization companies that put good articles out there. I would just do some reading for sure, just to get used to concepts. I find a lot of localization engineers that are fairly experienced still don't understand character encodings very well, and they couldn't explain it to you. One interview question I often ask is, "What's Unicode? Explain it to me." And people have a really hard time explaining it. Mm-hmm. Some people do better, some people do worse, but I haven't had anybody yet to really deeply explain it to me. Character encodings, Unicode.
And to be fair, even like experienced developers have problems with encoding. That's a tricky thing.
It is a tricky one. I actually wrote a training for that, and specifically that went really deep into, probably too deep. It's probably a nerd out, but it's fun. But I think you can't, knowing too much is not an issue. Is really not an issue in localization, right? And in politics it might be, but in engineering, I think knowing too much is really not a problem, right? I mean, there's not such thing as too much knowledge. But yeah, I mean, I would look at resources. I would talk to people. I mean, go to, if you go to LinkedIn, see if you can find some engineers and, ping somebody and say, hey, I'm really interested in engineering. It's hard to ask somebody for their time, right? But, it doesn't hurt to try. Just say you're really interested in it, and you see that this person is an experienced person, and they, maybe would be willing to answer a few questions or have a chat. And, you could probably find one or two. Localization people are pretty excited about localization. I mean, if somebody pinged me, I would be like, I'll have a Zoom meeting with you. I'll talk to you, 10, 15 minutes. We'll probably talk 2 hours in the end. But I would. Nobody's ever approached me, but I'd totally be willing to do that.
I passed 2 people to you.
Yeah, good. I'll just have to do it during work hours. That's the key, right? Counted as work. I hope nobody from my company is listening. But it is tricky because it's not like you can just buy a few books and read them, right? There are very, very few books about localization. I'm not a big reader. I wouldn't know, but I know there's not a lot of them out there. But when we talk about like general technical knowledge, what would you say that people should be able to, other than being able to turn on and turn off your computer? Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think you want to understand internationalization concepts. What are the most common internationalization issues? Like we said earlier, I think it was you, Andrej, about, maybe for entry level, that's not that important. But I think it is important because you're a better engineer if you understand it, even if you do, pre and post processing, but you're going to run into issues. You're going to find issues in the content if you know more about it. So basic internationalization concepts like hard coding of strings, how text is flowing, fonts, encodings, date and time formats, number formats, those kind of things, right? Really basic stuff. That's really important. I think understanding different file types and how they're localized is one of the first things I would want to learn. Mm-hmm. How a TMS works, how translation systems work. I think those are some of the most basic things, and then maybe some knowledge about when you do post processing, kind of pitfalls and things to pay attention to. Again, like fonts, for example, and programming layout. Skills, and this is maybe where Oksana also can.
So I can give you
a lot about Python. In a lot of.
So I can give you I can give you some very concrete answer to this. Again, depends on what is the company, what is the team, what are the expected responsibilities for you. If it's a big LSP, usually for a localization engineering, like they have a pretty high turnover. They are probably always hiring somebody. It's a good job if you want to like enter IT. Very often, so they don't actually expect you to understand like localization concepts.
Wait. When you say enter IT, did you mean IT or localization?
Whatever. IT is pretty good because you're getting introduced into like the technical, a very technical job that doesn't require a lot of programming skills or sometimes no programming skills. What we were looking for specifically was you have to understand formats like HTML, XML, JSON. You have to understand how to validate them because those are in big LSPs, but specifically, those are the problems that you will be fixing. Like, why is this JSON not validating? Why is this XML throwing an error? Because during post-processing, like there was some bug and now everything is broken. Right. And a lot of the times you have to do that manually because, if there is a bug, a lot of stuff gets screwed up and you have to go and fix it manually. So we were checking formats, how do you understand all these like string escapes? It's all very simple. We had these like 6 small tasks, and we did have Python. The reason why Python is popular is because it's very good for processing strings. But the funny thing is that my localization engineers very rarely got a task. Like when they were actually working, they very rarely got a task where they had to write some sort of a script. Sometimes it happens, but I don't think it's a requirement to get a localization engineering job. I think sometimes knowing about like the translation process, like if you're coming from the language side, it could work. If you have really no experience, but you like understand, technology in general, it could work. Yeah, go check out like what XML and JSON is. It's that simple. The requirements are that simple because you are expected to kind of learn about the job while you are doing it. Nobody really expects you to like be to understand everything about the localization process when you are going for an entry-level job for a localization engineer.
Yeah, I think like you said, it's not a requirement. I mean, for example, I'm not a scripting person. I don't know Python. I don't write JavaScript. I can read it a little bit. I can troubleshoot something. Maybe it's really basic, but I don't script. I've never scripted, and I made a pretty decent career as an LE. So,
but speaks from his summer house on the beach.
But, I think it's hugely useful. Python is definitely something that seems to align very well. And I also don't think it's that hard to learn. We've done a bunch of stuff in Perl. Maybe, I don't know if that's so much of a thing anymore. Might still be useful because it's also good for string handling and writing to files and stuff, text files, text-based output. And then... drawing a blank here for a second. Okay, JS and VB is useful too if you work with Office and Adobe applications. You want to script for the application, so you can do really cool stuff. For example, one example of something we did, it was for PowerPoint scripts that find certain things that PowerPoint doesn't have a lot of features for, so like line breaks and dealing with some font substitutions, things like that. It's nice now because it's gotten much easier in Office because they're not just these binary blobs anymore. They're actually XML files in a folder structure, so you can write scripts and you can more easily analyze what they're doing.
Yeah, that's what I forgot. That's what I forgot to mention is one of apart from all these formats, it's really good to understand because you will be most probably working on a Windows machine. It's very good to understand the structure of like a Word. An Excel file because they're actually like a hidden zipped file that's full of XMLs. So if you can read that, understand like why a file won't open after post-processing or something like that. It's good to understand how to work within Excel and write those formulas and like understand those like hidden cells and columns. It's all pretty simple stuff, but when it's actually a lot of simple knowledge. You have to understand a lot of different simple things. And understanding different encodings is actually useful. But I don't think for an entry-level job, they probably won't expect it. But it's a pretty good, it's a useful thing to understand for anybody who works in technology because it's always a problem.
Of course, encodings get much easier. We used to have native encodings for many of the languages, right? Now we have Unicode. We have a few flavors: UTF-16, UTF-32, and UTF-8. Most of the content being probably UTF-8 in most cases. So it's gotten much easier. We used to have to deal with GB2312 and shift-JIS and all those encodings, which made life so much more complicated. Yet you still see occasionally files in those encodings. It's like, hello, there's Unicode. It's been here for 20 plus years. But and then one other I think that's not so much programming, but regular expressions, of course, hugely useful because you really deal so often with text-based formats, JSON, XML, all text-based, HTML. So regular expression is just a wonderful thing. But, I'm also not very good with regular expression. I'm not a very advanced regular expression person. I just...
But you did pretty well, yes.
Well, the thing is, if I'm the sole LE in a company, I probably have to have a broader skill set. Mm-hmm. But I've always worked with 4 or 5. Right now, we have over 10 engineers in our company. So I don't need to do that because we have other people who are experts. So that's also a difference, right? If it's a very, very small group, right, and you're the only technical person, your expectations are going to be different. When you have a larger team, you can have different people with different expertise, and you can, work together to figure stuff out.
Yeah, actually, I completely forgot about regular expressions. That is a very useful skill to have for whatever. I mean, I think localization engineers do like the very basic NLP processing, and regular expressions is like the simplest NLP processing method. And we did a lot of that because, at the end of the day, any format, any text format is just a string. And the easiest way to manipulate a string is to just use some regular expressions. And it could be like, it's hard. At this point, I think I'm pretty good. I think I can do a lot of cool stuff with it because I just have a lot of experience. But yeah, learn like the basic stuff. Because I remember when I was starting, it's kind of, it's a whole programming language in itself. It's like a little script. So yeah, that's a really good point. Learn about formats, learn regular expressions, learn some basic Python that you can like show that you can do, like a 5-line function, and you got the job. It's not, yeah.
Before that, Oksana, when I saw that you were going to say something, I thought that you were going to push your agenda against XML and that everybody should be using JSON. I think you mentioned it in every episode, so you can go ahead.
XML is really annoying, but I mean, I don't like Windows in general. But I don't.
Are you a Mac person?
Yes, absolutely.
What? This is your last
Love
episode.
Mac. I don't like Windows. I think it's slow. I think a lot of the solutions that are like, I don't know, they're just redundant. But anyway, I don't think we'll switch to Mac. I think Windows is here to stay. So learn like the word structure. It's actually pretty interesting how they make it work. Yeah.
You guys mentioned briefly the TMS. Do you think that knowing a TMS and maybe learning something about it is important, or it's best to learn on the job when you see the actual files moving through the TMS?
Hard to learn about it when you're not working with it, I think, unless, I guess you could set one up. There's some free ones out there to just get to the basic idea of it. They're all a bit different, and if they're commercial tools, I don't know how much you can do on your own, but I think work experience mainly is the key. But you do want to learn and understand it. You don't want to leave that to the PM because there's a lot you can do with parsers, for example. There's many translation tools have some pretty advanced parsing capabilities. I think some may have less and outsource it to other tools like Okapi, but other ones have it all built in, like SDL and Charter Studio, and then systems that are based on their filters. They have pretty broad file support, and you can add stuff, right? You can create your own filters for stuff like XML. So I think it's important for an engineer to understand all that flow. You don't want to have this gap from when you hand it off for somebody maybe to create the job, or even if you create the job. I think you still want to understand the process, because the things translators do or editors do that are going to cause you problems at the end, create bugs. You still want to understand that there's behavioral stuff, right, from translators and how they handle stuff like tags. And I think you still want to understand that because you can be a person who can help them do it better because you can show some of the issues from it. And then you can go back to them or to a PM and say, hey, we need to communicate that they're not doing this right and it's causing problems when we post-process. So you really have to understand the whole process.
I think the TMS systems are so different from company to company. Nobody actually expects you to be able to use it on the first day. Everybody, they will give you some sort of a training. I think all of these like filters and parsers are also very different tools. They probably use different methods and they look different. So, and it's all like an inside company, confidential type of stuff. And I don't think you get the full capability in something like Trados, because I don't think Trados is built to do that sort of localization engineering. So nobody will ever require you to know what a TMS is or to be able to use their TMS if you're an entry-level engineer. If it's like a mid-level, they probably need you to understand the whole process of localization. And if you understand the whole process, you know what a TMS is because that's the TMS is the system through which it happens.
Right.
But I don't think would you ask that question during a job interview? Like what is a TMS? Probably a good question, but I don't think I would expect everybody to understand it. I think it's that side of the job. I think it's in the training.
Yeah, I would ask for sure, if they had worked with translation management systems or just to see what their experience level is so I can have an idea how much training I'm going to need to give them. But I think once you know one tool, they're all somewhat similar. And certainly you can leverage some of that knowledge, work in learning a new tool, going from MemSource to Trados or I don't think it's that big of a jump, right? I think because the concept is the same, you have to parse out the content somehow, present it to the translator, give them some tools to do their work, and then assemble the file back together and spit it out. I mean, that's pretty much every TMS does that to a degree. It's a little more complex with some of the TMSs that are in context, like the proxy type tools, like SmartLing and other ones. There are many out there, I believe, these days. Honestly, I haven't worked with many of them. When we did work with them, they didn't work very well. There were a lot of issues with them. I hope they gotten better, but it's because there's too many tools out there. I mean, you're going to learn them all just so you can do well in the interview. I think that's really not necessary. I think you have to understand the concept.
Mm-hmm. One thing that we didn't mention is bug fixing. Is it automatically implied that if you can do the thing that leads to somebody testing something, that you automatically are supposed to be able to bug fix it? Or is that a skill on its own?
I think it's an important part of engineering. You can split it. You could find ways to have linguists address linguistic bugs depending on what kind of systems you use. But I think that the tricky thing with it is that, if you tell somebody there's a bug here and then they go in and fix it there and then they're done, they might miss a broader, more global issue. I think an engineer, you're more likely is going to go into maybe a project TM and search for the content and see, hey, there's like 20 occurrences of this. Let's fix them all so that it doesn't come back, right? Or dig a little deeper on the underlying cause of something. There may be an issue with the URL, and so somebody just fixes it, but the engineer might wonder, hey, why did this break? This is weird. This shouldn't have broken during translation. They go in and they maybe find an issue with the parser or with the source files that actually created the problem, and they can eliminate that in the future and save money that way.
I think it just depends on job experience. Like I would expect somebody with like 5-year experience to think that way, but I wouldn't expect like an entry-level engineer to like see the whole picture and then go and fix all of the occurrences. I still make this mistake. I mean, I'm not quite sure that I understand what you mean by bug fixing. If an engineer can do something, they can write some sort of a parser, they must be able to fix a bug if it's in that parser. But if it's in some system that a developer did, then no, they shouldn't be.
The reason
that.
why I started talking about bug fixing is that when I started and when we were talking about different flavors of engineering, when I started, you could technically have a software engineer, localization software engineer, and someone who was responsible for user assistance or documentation. And for software engineers, that was a bulk of our work. Once all the testers tested the new Microsoft systems, we would get hundreds of bugs, and you would need to find how they actually occurred, whether it's a localization issue or a globalization issue, how you can fix it, whether you can fix it, or whether you need to ask linguists or the vendors to do it. So that was a lot of work for us. I'm not sure if it's still that prevalent these days.
Well, and that's actually a tricky one, right? Because if you test the product, you have 25 languages, and it's a huge product, you might have 1,000 bugs reported by QA. And is it a good use of an engineer's time to go through 1,000 bugs to, recognize that 950 of them are simple linguistic things that could just be, fixed by a QA tester maybe. So I think you have to look at that. And so first you would want to actually know, why do we even have that many linguistic bugs? Are we not doing language review? Maybe we're just doing translation. Maybe we're doing MT with post editing, but no second person is looking at it. And maybe that means we need to have a second person do an editing pass, so that, and in context, give them the context of the software, even have maybe a localized build they can look at while they're editing, so that you don't have so many bugs. Actually, this is a huge issue because let's say again, 25 language project, if you put the burden of doing something for 25 languages on the engineer, you have one engineer, but you have 25 QA testers for each language. Put some stuff on the QA tester, because you're dividing it up among 25 people. It's much more efficient, right? From efficient, not necessarily that it's going to be cheaper. Maybe it is because the resources are less expensive. But just from a bottleneck, you don't want the engineer to be the bottleneck who now has to deal with 1,000 bugs. It's not a good use of their time. So you have to find a process to divide up the pure linguistic issues from things that require more investigation. And it's not an easy thing to do, because the person making that decision has to understand that, right? So one thing we've tried is have a QA lead actually scrub the bugs, basically review them, and kind of best guess divide them up between here for the linguists, and then these are for the engineers. Sometimes I've done it as an engineer, but it's very time consuming. But you get really good at it too. I mean, you start looking at bugs, and within seconds you can usually tell, if it's one or the other, you put it in one or the other bucket. And then if the linguist or the QA person can't fix it, it might come back to you, right? So somebody has to manage that. But that's definitely very important to protect the LE's time, because what you lose is, if you do that, you lose the ability for them to focus on other things that are more important, right? Because if they're just doing bug fixing all day long, for an entry level person, that might be fine. They gather some experience from that, but you don't want to have an experienced LE do that all day long. That's just not a good use of their time.
This is a really good example of like how localization engineers are sometimes treated, because sometimes people will see them as like, oh, these are not software developers, but these are not like language people. So they do all of the stuff that requires logic, but doesn't require programming, which is really annoying because I would be upset if I was asked to, sort these bugs, maybe like not even solve them, just like look through 1,000 bugs. I'm not a replacement for a computer. I want to be doing like creative work. So yeah, I totally agree. That yeah.
Yet even if you're a fairly experienced engineer, doing some bug fixing or going through some bugs, it can actually give you a lot of insight too into some of the issues. So, for example, I manage a team, right? But I always try to still do some hands-on work here and there, so I don't get too disconnected from it. And I had a project recently. It was a new project. It was a website that was migrated from one CMS to the other, and we had a lot of issues in the early process, and I went through some bugs, and I realized, these are actually things that originate from an issue in the system. So we need to go deal with that in the system. And so I rolled it up to whoever, was responsible for that, and they'd actually created a process improvement. So I made a difference there. Maybe a less experienced engineer would have just fixed the bug and moved on, right? So but it's really tricky, that balance between, they definitely don't want to have an experienced lead just do routine work all day long. They're going to get really sick of it and frustrated because it doesn't use their skills.
Yeah. So speaking about how to waste a loc engineer's time, this is something that I think that you wanted to talk about. What are the things we talk about? What is the expectation of LEs? Why they are useful? But what are the things that maybe in your experience they end up doing, but they shouldn't?
Yeah, there are a few things here. I mean, so there's one part is, what is that? Look at so as a manager, I have to look at that because I have 10 people and they're all different. Every person is different. And what is their strongest suit, and also what do they like? I could see that somebody would be really good at something, but they don't necessarily enjoy it. I'm not going to necessarily push them in that direction. You want the person that's a communicator be the one that talks to customers, right? Those are the ones that are going to get the biggest win with the customer because they can explain concepts and kind of get them interested in it. They have to, it's almost like marketing, right? You have to kind of sell it to them. You have to be good at that. That's something I was always good at. I always enjoyed. That's something I could do all day long, is talk to customers about internationalization. I don't get to do it that much, but it's, if it needs to be done, that's something I do. And then other people, they're just very happy to just do routine work. So you have to recognize that, and then allow people to grow. You find out, okay, this person's doing a lot of routine work, so they're getting experience, and then you just keep adding things to their plate and kind of see if that's the direction you want to go. You look at their interests, right? But so the other part, that this is probably one of the biggest frustrations I've had in my career, is that we load up people with project work, and then we expect them to do some innovation and process improvement and tools work as well. And really the two things just conflict with each other, and then nothing gets done well. And this is companies are trying to staff as tightly as they can, right? They want to be as efficient as they can. They don't want to waste resources. But I don't think it's a good way to make headway on innovation and automation and tools. I think you have to allow people to really focus on that. So in my perfect world, I would have the people that are really good at that, I would more or less dedicate to that. I wouldn't maybe let them totally lose touch with the hands-on engineering, because you kind of still have to have that to understand the problems. Yes. So they have to have a lot of experience in that production part. But I think you really have to give the assigned time. Then why don't you take them off projects for 3 months and have them develop a tool or a process innovation thing? They can always go back to doing some other project work, but they have to free up people's time, because those two things constantly fighting for attention leads to just mediocre results on both sides. So I think that's one, and I haven't been in a situation where that was done well. And it is very difficult, because with vendors, again, you have to, people have to be productive. They have to be billable. So one way would be to go to a customer and say, hey, we have this idea of this innovation for your project. It's going to actually save you money, or show them how it saves you money. It saves the money in the long run. In the long run, would you be willing to fund the effort to develop this process or tool? And I think if you can sell it to them, then now you have your engineer paid for that time, right? Funded. And so you don't have to worry about them doing production work, because they'll fund it for the innovation, and you can let them just focus on that.
Yeah, that was my biggest pet peeve, is that very often we just ended up doing like a computer's work, like something that could have been automated. But then the argument would be, well, this is going to take a whole week to automate, and then 5 minutes to run all these files. But then the engineer is spending the whole week to check all these files, just doing very routine, like boring work. And so it's a vicious circle, because there's new translations coming in. We have to submit them. So you should be working on actually checking the post-processed translations instead of writing code. But then if I took the time to write the code, then I wouldn't have to be doing this boring work all the time. That was one. But the second problem is, very often we weren't able to do that like innovation, do those scripts and stuff, because other parts of the system wouldn't allow us, because it was like outdated software. So the problem was at the very sort of root of how everything was working, and it was actually cheaper for the company to like pay people to do the boring work that a computer could have done, and then rebuild the whole system to be smarter, and then retrain the whole staff. And that is maddening, because again, it's a vicious circle. Like it doesn't. It's very hard to improve, because you have, it would cost way more to do something right. And a lot, and give the engineering, the localization engineers the possibility to automate more stuff and innovate more, than to actually just keep doing things the wrong way.
Yeah, which actually takes us to another role that I think an LE has, an experienced LE, is to really look at these systems and point it out. Sometimes something is really, inefficient and not good for localization, and maybe nobody even realizes it because nobody's pointing it out. It might work fine for the native language content, pretty efficient, and they will go, another 5 years with that system. But for localization, it's really painful. And if we just keep chugging along doing the manual work and nobody brings it up, maybe there's a way to get some change. So you speak up, document some of the pain points and the inefficiencies, and maybe make some suggestions. That's part of the localization engineer's job, to me, to really analyze that and communicate it. It may not go anywhere, but I think it's still a good thing to do. And the other part, was saying, when you were saying about sometimes we just hire people to do the routine work, even though we could do some automation. I think I would argue that if I'm an engineer and I have a very small problem I want to solve, it's something manual and it's just annoying and it takes me maybe an hour, and I write a script and it takes me an hour and a half to write the script to solve a 1 hour problem, I think it's still time well spent, because you learn something. You learn a lot more writing a script for an hour and a half than doing an hour of manual work, right? So even though it didn't save you any time, I think it was still the right thing to. I do it all the time, little batch script, just so I don't have to do the annoying manual work. Even though it saved me no time, I probably ran into a problem that I solved and that I learned something. So I think the striving to learn something and try things is hugely important. You have to be curious, and you have to be excited about what you're doing. If you're not excited about localization, or the engineering part at least, I think it's just another job. But I think if you're really into it, I think it's one of the more exciting jobs out there.
I think it does depend on the team and the company. Sometimes those sort of initiatives actually don't really go anywhere. Sometimes you're not allowed to write the script. Like you were supposed to be checking everything, manually. So everybody is sure that, a human checked this. So if you write the script to make your job easier, you actually may be reprimanded. Because
nobody has to know. You just do
exactly.
it. Don't talk about it. Just do it, right? Unless somebody's standing behind you looking over your shoulders, you just do stuff. But yeah, I there's sometimes there are work environments like that. And I think that's an important point too. If you're in a localization job and you really feel like it's just a lot of, pushing to be faster and people overloaded, everybody's working 50 hours a week, you're probably just in the wrong place, because from my experience, there are good localization companies out there. There's some out there that will just burn you out and then they'll just hire the next person. I know that exists because I know stories. I'm not going to mention any names, but there are others where it's awesome. Awesome people, good culture. I mean, it's still stressful and intense, and you'd still wish they could pay more and have better benefits. It's an issue, but it could be a good place to work. And I think a lot of people would work for a little bit less in a really awesome environment than work for more pay in an environment where they're just totally stressed and burned out.
Right. I agree.
Yeah. And I think,
sorry, Oksana, I just want to quickly go to chat because we have a new question, and it's a really good one from Shan Wang. For companies that don't have a loc engineer yet, what makes the management decide to open such roles?
It's a good question. It depends a little bit on, we don't know what the fictitious company is doing, or maybe a real company. We don't have a lot of background, but I think, let's say they do some localization in-house, but they do what I mentioned earlier. They kind of, you have a PM, you have maybe a QA lead, and you have translators. I think it's a matter of somebody taking the initiative to show what we're missing, what we're not doing, like, or that, some people are overburdened because they have to do it. I mean, somebody has to fix bugs, right? Is it the linguists? Are we overwhelming them with technical things that they don't understand? So I think it's a matter of showing that there is something's lacking, some expertise is lacking. There's no process improvement. There's no, we just throw stuff in a tool and then translators get strings that are chopped up sentences, and we just push it through. We just tell the linguist to deal with it, right? Because you don't have a technical person who can analyze to figure out what's going on. So it's a matter of somebody taking the initiative to show that this is there's something missing.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, every hire must make some sort of economical sense. Mm-hmm. So if you're saying that you can afford to pay another person and you are choosing between whatever, a language lead or another software engineer, and you can see that there are like half of the tasks that your current software engineer is doing, he doesn't really, have enough experience in that, and he doesn't really want to be doing that. That engineer, I should say, they don't want to be doing that. Then, and if there is no need to develop some sort of a product, but you actually need, you can see that there is that engineering work that needs to be done, and you don't have the expertise in your team that fits that perfectly. And there is actually there are people that are overworked, and you can afford to hire another person. Then it makes a perfect sense to hire a localization engineer. Sometimes the developer can do some of that stuff if it's not a lot of work. I think for a product company that is translating into 20 languages, and it's very important for you to that those languages are really well localized, because your product is the success of your product depends on that. I think somebody that oversees localization, that would make sense too. Yeah.
Right.
I hope that answer made sense.
Yeah. What I'm thinking is when you talk about the product companies, let's say that would be the buyer side who have the need to localize something. Just from the sense of that they created a product, which let's say is a tech product, they would be more tech experienced. So to them, it would be more easier to understand having someone technical expertise. But what I'm thinking when I was reading this question is, imagine a very small language heavy vendor that is comprised mostly of PMs who, yes, they can take the files, they can upload them into the TMS, it goes through translation review, and then they deliver. Would these people even know that they're missing out on some of the engineering potential?
Well, if you are receiving weird formats that the PMs don't know what to do with, that's the place for the localization engineer to step in.
Yeah, I don't know how a small company like that would be able to compete, honestly, because unless they're really a niche type vendor that only does certain things, that say we only translate Word documents. Right. Or we only translate through a certain web localization tool or some whatever it is, a very narrow scope. But I also think that'd be really hard to compete. Maybe it exists. I'm not sure. I know there are.
I think they do exist.
Because,
really?
Yes, because all of the local agencies, people who just want to translate, and they start a small agency and they start getting projects, maybe in simple formats.
But they would usually cooperate with LSPs, and they would receive something like an XLEAF format.
Yeah, but the LSP is the one who has that engineer, and they create the files for this little agency. So then the agency, from the perspective of the agency.
Yeah, if they're translation-only agencies and they work with another company that does the engineering, then that's different. I mean, I think that's different. The engineering is still being done. But I think the question was more if the engineering is not part of the flow anywhere, if they're just doing, we receive a file, we throw it into TMS, and then we do QA at the end, and there's no technical person to help with the process, I think that's what I was addressing.
Right. Okay, final question. Beat, it's 1 more minute. Can we have one more question?
Yeah, I'm good.
So this is a tricky one. I'm not sure how you guys can answer it. I'm not sure how I would answer this. It's a question from Tucker. What can LEs expect to make in terms of salary?
Not enough. I really hate to be a little bit negative here. Again, I think if you have an opportunity with a large company, I'm sure you can make a decent salary. I could see that you would work at Netflix and really be deep in that part of the development team. You're the internationalization expert. I can see that somebody makes 150K plus benefits. I think that's the exception. I could be wrong. Somebody super experienced who does a lot of consulting and does, works at an hourly rate, at a high rate, $100, $150 an hour, that exists. But I think that's really hard to get there. I find that entry level, that the pay tends to be low, too low entry, I think it's fine to have a few years in the beginning, maybe the first 4 or 5 years where it's kind of maybe like if you make $50,000 a year. I'm just doing the US centric look at it here. It's hard for me to compare with other countries, but right. I think that's fine if you do it for a while, but there has to be some kind of room to move up. So I think the way you pick a company is you pick a company that's not too small. Because let's say you have an engineering team of 10 people, there is room for some people being entry level and some people being more experienced. And the company has enough business volume, it's easier for them to pay a couple people, like a senior type salary, right? It takes a long time to get there. I mean, it took me 10, 12, 13 years to have a salary where I could say, okay, I'm pretty happy with my salary. And that was working for a large tech company, not working for an LSP. And when I switched to LSP, I had to, take a cut because they just couldn't pay the large company salaries. But so you definitely don't do localization for the money unless you own the business and you have a very successful business. It can certainly be big, right? If you're very successful, you run the business well, it can be a big thing. But as an employee, I think that's why I say you have to love what you're doing. And then I think as long as you make good money and maybe you have to have a frugal lifestyle, you can save more. But if you want to have a really luxurious lifestyle, I don't know, localization engineering is necessary. What do you want to go into?
I would agree. I'd say definitely expect lower than average salary, unless you're doing something like outsourcing. Like if I work from Ukraine and I make, whatever I make, $6 an hour, I can live a pretty comfortable life in Ukraine. But I think localization engineering is kind of like a transitional position. So you need to decide where are you doing next. Are you moving up to like management, like managing localization engineers? Are you going to be moving to software development, maybe like software development with like NLP incline? For me, it was just I wanted to learn about a particular side of the market. So I knew what I was going to be doing next. And it was a very valuable experience, but I was definitely not planning to stay in localization engineering for the rest of my life. And now my next project, I can say that I'm really, really comfortable, but it's not localization engineering. But the experience that I got from that definitely helped me get here. And I really liked the job. I really liked solving those problems. But for me, a curious person, it kind of got a little bit boring once I knew everything about it. So, I don't know.
So basically, Oksana is saying I was in transition for 25 years of my career.
No.
I know what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. I think it can be other things, right?
I think in your particular case, I think your career trajectory was a bit different. Your plans were different. And you did get to a better point, right? Like you didn't stay just like a average localization engineer. So yeah, I think it was a bit of a transition. I think you tried different things. So yeah.
Yeah, I definitely. I mean, I developed a lot. I mean, I went from definitely doing just heads down, project work without customer interaction to really being a internationalization evangelist and well, there's also, it depends on the, so there's a couple other things here. Nowadays, people jump around more, and I encourage it. Jump to, work for different companies, switch companies every couple of years. I have no problem with that. That wasn't really acceptable when I was starting. It's like you wanted if people applied that consistently changing jobs, that was kind of a red flag. That's different now. I think it's world has changed, and I think it's good. But the other thing is, I had, the job I had with the large company was a really good job. I had no reason to leave that. I had a family, I had kids, this gave me stability. So that also depends. Are you looking for stability, or are you looking for excitement, or a mix of both, right?
Yeah. A couple of good points to mention.
On your personal environment.
I think that could be a very stable job, because if you're a good localization engineer, there are a lot of big companies that will be around for a long time. So if you're looking for like an average pay job, but that's very stable, localization engineers are rarely fired, right? So that's pretty cool. The other point that I wanted to mention is, for somebody who's in linguistics, like a translator, but they want to get into like the more technical side of things, like maybe they want to do computational linguistics and they just don't know where to start, I think that's a pretty good start. So if you don't have like an engineering background, but you want to get into that field, then I think localization engineering could really be helpful for you as a nice start in your resume. So yeah.
It's interesting how we said it's not a very easily defined role, because when we recruit in a localization engineering position, and I look at resumes, or I talk to candidates, there are many candidates, they're just PMs really, with a little bit of technical knowledge, and that's not really sufficient for us. When we look for a localization engineer, we definitely look for an engineering minded person with a certain experience. And so there's not even a clear concept out there for people. And, people always apply for things that maybe is not quite their role. People just throw it out there. It doesn't harm them, right? But it's definitely a huge, we get people that are just, oh yeah, I've been a translator all my life. And they apply for an engineering position. And I don't think I would consider that unless they somehow blow me away with something about them that just tells me this person is going to be really awesome at that. And actually have had that. I've interviewed people that really didn't fit very well, but once I talked to them, I got really excited about them. But it's definitely an issue of people applying that really, they're not engineers, because I don't think they entirely understand. They just see localization. They maybe don't see the engineering part.
Yeah, but that was me. Like, I was a translator. I studied translation. I was working as a translator, but I was learning programming on the side because I really wanted to get into the field. My resume didn't look like it fit, but if you talked to me, or if you gave me like a task, I think you would actually consider me for a position like that. So, yeah,
it's because you're curious and you want to. You always want to expand, and you've done all these different things because you always want to learn new things. And you, like I said, you get bored when it's stagnant, right? And that's really the key. It's okay to get bored, but you have to recognize that, and then you move on in a different direction, or add, or go up or sideways in different directions. I think that's the person you want, and you also want people to be self-driven. As now managing a team. Honestly, my favorite people are the ones who just go and do stuff. Even if they're maybe not supposed to do that, but I'd rather have someone to be curious and get sucked into something, and then they come back to me and show me something that's exciting. And then the person who's afraid to kind of, they kind of stay on the tracks and they're afraid to veer. So I like people who get excited about stuff and bring ideas and speak up, and that's definitely my favorite. But other people who just focus on production are important too. They're all part of a team, because there is a lot of production work. There's a lot of heads down work. You still have to have people who do that and do it well. So you need all of it for a rounded team.
And you have to like the people that can like do the same boring task for a month and not complain. I think those people are very valuable, and they're just content because, you know, they make money and they have their family, and they, you know, and nobody touches them.
Right.
And they don't get bored. And I don't think that's bad. I think that's a really valuable employee.
And they still get more and more experience as they work on stuff. You know, what you want to make sure is maybe they can do a few different things in production. They shouldn't just work on this one large project for 20 years, right? You can still have them, maybe give them a couple of smaller projects too, just to kind of, you still need to develop them, right?
And people with that type of mind, they do grow. They just do it a bit differently than this like messy person that like is hacking everything that they see.
And when you manage a team, that's what you have to find out about. You have to talk to people about that. You have to find out. The worst thing is an unhappy employee, right? Especially an unhappy engineer. You never want to have an unhappy engineer. So you got to talk to people about it. You know, figure out what does interest them. And I have, you know, I've seen all of it. People are like, I want more challenges. I want more change. I want to learn new things. There's not enough time. And other people say, you know what? I get anxiety when I have to do these things. I don't want to present things, or I don't know if I want to write training for people or things like that. I just want to do production work.
Now I'm curious what happens if you have an unhappy engineer, but we can leave it for part 2. What I wanted to say, because you guys started talking, really excited, super. What I wanted to say is, when you were talking about the engineer, like it's like a good starting role, but it's not your end goal. I would say that it depends on the person.
Yes, I agree.
Because when I was working in Moravia,
I was working as an engineer, and I always wanted to move up. I wanted to be a project manager next. After I moved to a different company, and I started working as a project manager, I met one guy who used to work in Moravia, and he was working as an engineer for 6 or 7 years. And I was asking him why, because to me, it was always like, I always want more. I always want to go higher, climb the ladder. And he was satisfied with that position. And that's totally fine. If you do what you like, there's no reason to look for more. You don't even have to be a manager at some point.
No, I think I meant, if you want like better pay, you definitely can stay in localization engineering, but you need to think, what is the trajectory that you can move from there to get that better pay? Because you can be, with experience, you can be doing like advanced localization engineering with some software stuff, with like some development.
Yes.
Yeah, or you could MT, right, being
Exactly.
more and more of a big thing. You could really get into MT technology, how to assess MT quality, training engines, all those things. You could slowly develop that as you're working as an engineer and become an expert in that field. So that's again what we talked about in the beginning, right? You have all these opportunities, these different directions that you can take. But the one thing I notice is you usually have to be the one pushing that. You may have a really good manager who pushes you in that direction, but really you have to kind of own that. And that's that curiosity and that kind of mindset of wanting to learn different things.
Yeah.
Or you can be a lead. You can lead a team of localization engineers and still be in engineering.
Right.
Yeah. And the second point that I wanted to make when it comes to salary, because you said like if you want more money as an engineer, you need to grow. 2 months ago, I would agree with all of you that engineers are not paid enough. And that was one of the reasons why I wanted to move from engineer to PM, because I thought that PMs, they make a lot more money than an engineer does. But what I learned recently, I was talking to someone from Argentina, and she told me that in Argentina, engineers are paid more than PMs. I don't know if it's true, but probably it's true, because engineering is more rare, maybe in that country, and there's a bunch of PMs. I don't know.
But
It's possible. I mean, I've seen billing rates for PM hours being higher than engineering hours. So you would think that then the salaries are respectively lower too for engineers.
Right.
But that the one thing is about project management, for example. Project management gives you different opportunities, because if you're a localization project manager, you can step out of localization and manage projects because you know how to manage projects. There's project managers needed in almost any company of some sort.
Yes.
So it's much broader.
Yes.
Localization engineering is much more narrow. So that's why I'm saying if you like localization, you can do that all your life. I mean, I've done it all my life, and I still like a lot about it. My biggest struggle is just that I'm getting older and I don't want to work as hard anymore. I want more time off and just less work time is my big challenge. I got some physical challenges too on top of it, so that I'm dealing with. So I want to work less, but I think there is a great career in localization because it's not going away. And it's always changing. That's part of I just want to get a little bit into excitement because we had a few topics that were maybe a little bit, a little bummer aspects of it, which, there are for every job. But I think the technologies always change. The tools always change. The types of content always change. Not a lot of languages added and removed. I mean, the language sets are, language doesn't develop quite that fast, but but hopefully companies expand the language sets to reach more people. So that might be an opportunity too. So always, you're in tech, and tech is moving faster than ever. It's a very exciting place to be. I mean, most cases you're in tech, at least to a degree. If you just do medical translation, maybe not so much. But if you do localization for, among others, tech companies, or even if it's not for tech, you could do a localization project for a church. But they use platforms, right? They use technology. So you're still dealing with technology. So really, it's technology that makes it exciting. The ever-changing, fast-paced change, that makes it exciting because you always have to adapt.
Yeah.
I think in terms of pay, what was it in Argentina? I think it depends.
And actually, we even have a new comment here from Isaias Sereda. And he also says that, yes, also in Brazil, engineers receive better pay than PM. So maybe it's South American.
So I need to move to Brazil.
So I think it depends on the country because probably those like major LSPs, they are always in the US or something like that. And so they try to outsource a lot of this stuff. And maybe they just prefer to have PMs, in their country, but engineering, they don't care about as much. And so just the rates go up because of how the market is functioning. I know in Ukraine that definitely is the case. There is a lot of engineering work outsourced here. So like if you live, if you live outside of the US, there is a lot of opportunity to make really good pay by just like learn some regular expressions and apply for an entry level position.
Well, you made a really good point, Oksana. You're saying you live in a lower cost country compared to other countries, and so I think geo arbitrage is a beautiful thing that where you either maybe you already live in a lower cost country, but there are opportunities to work for a company that pays more. I mean, they're probably not going to pay you, maybe U.S. rates if you live in let's say Eastern Europe, but they'll still. I mean, if you're good in negotiating, you might still have a significant increase in what you can make. I live on the west coast of the United States. It's extremely expensive here. Yeah. So my salary has barely been keeping pace with the cost of living. So I never did that, but I think if you could, especially with remote work being ubiquitous, you can even move somewhere cheaper and you can do all the work remotely. And let's say you work for a company already. Let's say you live in the US and you decide to move to Costa Rica and you do the work from there and you live on, a third of the expenses, but they're probably not going to, as long as they're allowing you to work remotely, they're not going to adjust your salary for Costa Rica.
And
so
also,
that's an opportunity.
Take into account the demand supply of a particular position. So something like a QA engineer, there are a lot of entry-level jobs for QA, and it's sort of almost equally easy to get the job as a localization engineer, but the pay for it would be substantially lower because so many people want to get into QA. Yeah. Like you would literally get 2-3 times lower pay than for localization engineering. If you're into this field and you get these minimal skills, and you can sell yourself and be like, yeah, I really like this job, I want to do it. Your minimal pay would be way higher right off the bat than something like QA or a junior Python developer, because there are so many junior Python developers and very few localization engineers. So if you like it and you live in a country like Ukraine or South America or whatever, I think it's I think it can actually bring you quite good pay. I don't know what's happening in other countries like US. I think US is a bit complicated for all positions right now.
On the other hand, Oksana, like you said, you could also use a QA position as an entry into the field. So what I've seen, and this is actually what happened to me. I started as a German tester. I was hired because I speak German, and literally it was just they wanted German skills and like basic computer skills. That's all it was required when I got my first job. Then I became a QA lead, and then I switched over to engineer. So that was my entry into it. And I think that's still possible. I see it in my company where somebody might be in a QA lead role, but then they say, hey, if I have some open time, can I start doing some engineering tasks, and you train them on it, and then they can kind of shift. So that's a good thing anyway, to do it, develop your employees that way, see what their interest is, and shift them around the company, have them do different things, right?
Sure. I'm just saying when it comes to outsourcing, QA would be actually cheaper.
Yeah, that's true.
All right.
Yeah, from a salary point of view, I don't know if that's the good path, but if all you have is language skills and basic computer skills, you can probably find a testing position for that language, right? And that can give you a foot in the door. I mean, often all it takes is a foot in the door. You just want to have people be exposed to you and your skills and your abilities, and then you can start proving things. If you don't have a job, you can't prove anything. But once you're in a company, you can, and especially if it's a good company, you're going to get the opportunities that you want, because you're going to, if you're good at selling yourself and asking for things and being curious and developing.
Just do something. Usually the best advice is like, do something. Don't stop watching the stream. Go do something.
Yes, do something. That's a great.
That's a good way to end the stream. Since we're 20 minutes over, we're just wasting your time. You should go do something. All right. Final comments, thoughts.
Just look at the quote behind you, Andrej. Just be legendary.
Yeah, you can see the whole thing, but on the stream it's a little bit cut off. They can only see average and gendery.
Average gendery.
So one,
is that a new gender?
I mean, localization is awesome. I think to me, it even got more exciting because you got much more diverse teams. More people can work remotely. You get to work from people from all different countries. To me, that's really exciting. I love that. As a manager, I love that. It expands my horizons. It also has advantages because if people work in different time zones, it gives people more flexibility. So if somebody really likes working from home and they can be a localization engineer from home, it can have a full career at home and they love it. I mean, how exciting is that? You couldn't really do that 20 years ago, not easily, right? The tools really weren't there and the opportunities weren't there. So, but no, it's great. I think especially if you have a passion for languages and broadening access to products, and I think it's a great career. Doesn't mean you have to do it for the rest of your life, but if it's not for the rest of your life, I think it's a springboard to something else, or just move around like Oksana. I mean, she's developed she's meandering to all kinds of different things.
She's well-rounded, yes.
And it's great. It's fantastic.
Not meandering. What I was saying earlier is it's a good entry job into computational linguistics and NLP if you don't quite know where else to go if you're coming from languages, and it's a pretty exciting market if you like languages. So,
but did you know you were going to get into that from the beginning?
Yes, I knew that since I was 16.
All right, you were meandering. I guess you had a pretty straight path. Yeah.
I had a plan.
Right? Yeah, but for a lot of people, it's not the case. And I mean, it'll be meandering in a way that you're aimless, but you allow yourself to go in one direction, and if you and then pivot in a different direction, it's okay to do that. It's okay to try different things. So I didn't mind it mean it in an aim, because the river always gets to the ocean, right? Unless there's a drought, I guess. But generally, the river meanders, but it always keeps moving, and it always goes towards its goal. So,
all right, guys. Well, let's wrap it up. Thank you very much for coming to the stream and sharing your experience and your thoughts on localization engineering. And it's going to be it from us. And see you some other time. All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Bye.